Grath did not take the baby to the medical bay. He did not take her to the brig. He carried the crate straight to his personal quarters at the top of the ship and shut the door behind him. His quarters were large by any standard, a wide room with a low ceiling, bare walls made of dark metal, and a single viewport that looked out into the endless black of space. There was a sleeping platform bolted to the floor, a weapons rack on one wall, and a small desk covered in tactical reports. It was a soldier's room, cold and hard and built for nothing but function. He set the crate on the desk and stood over it for a long time. The baby was still sleeping. The oxygen recycler in the crate was running low, its hum growing weaker by the minute. Grath reached in and disconnected it, then adjusted the ventilation controls on the wall to pump breathable air into the room at levels safe for a human. Dravaki kept their ships hot, nearly double what a human body could handle comfortably. He brought the temperature down until the air in the room felt cool against his plating, uncomfortably cool, but survivable for the small thing in the crate. He was still standing there when the door opened behind him. Lieutenant Drea Sen walked in without knocking. She had that right. She had been Grath's second-in-command for 22 years, and in all that time, she had never once been afraid of him, which was more than most could say. She was tall, even by Dravaki standards, lean and sharp-featured, with a mind that could cut through a problem faster than a plasma blade through sheet metal. She stopped 3 steps inside the room. She looked at the crate. She looked at the baby. She looked at Grath. "Tell me that is not what I think it is," she said. "It is exactly what you think it is," Grath replied. When she opened them again, her expression was the same one she wore when reviewing a battle plan that was about to go very wrong. Grath, harboring a human aboard a military vessel violates Articles 7, 12, 19, and 31 of the Dravaki Military Code. Any one of those carries a sentence of permanent exile. All 4 together would be enough to have you stripped of your rank and your armor. I know. The child would not survive in the brig. I know that too. Then what is your plan? He looked at her. For a moment the hard lines of his face seemed to soften, just barely, just enough to notice if you knew where to look. I do not have one yet. Drea stared at him for a long time. Then she turned and walked out without another word, pulling the door shut behind her. Over the next several days, Grath did something no one aboard the Iron Veil had ever seen him do. The great DreadWalker, the destroyer of human fleets, the author of half the tactical doctrines in the Dravaki military library, sat at his desk and studied human infant care manuals pulled from captured data archives. Like a student preparing for an exam he was not sure he could pass. He learned that human babies needed to eat every few hours. He learned that they slept in short bursts and cried when they were hungry, uncomfortable, or simply wanted to be held. He learned that their bones were soft, that their skin bruised easily, and that their skulls had gaps in them that would not close for months. This last detail horrified him in a way that 40 years of warfare had not managed. He could not understand how a species so fragile had survived long enough to become a threat to anyone. He built a crib out of supply containers, lining the inside with strips of insulation cut from maintenance panels. He fabricated a feeding system, using a nutrient dispenser modified to produce something close to human milk. Though the first 3 attempts came out either too thick, too hot, or mildly toxic, he got it right on the 4th try. The baby, Lucy, though he did not call her that yet, woke up on the 2nd day and cried for 6 straight hours. The sound was incredible. It filled his quarters, bounced off the metal walls, and seemed to drill directly into the center of his skull. He had stood in the path of artillery bombardments that were less persistent. He picked her up. It took him several attempts to figure out how to hold her without hurting her. His hands were enormous, built for gripping weapons and tearing through armor, and the baby was so small that she nearly disappeared inside his palm. But eventually he found a way, cradling her against the inside of his arm, where the plating was thinnest, and his body heat came through. She stopped crying almost immediately. She looked up at him with wide, dark eyes. She did not scream. She did not flinch. She simply looked, as if she were trying to figure out what this giant thing was that was holding her, and had decided, for the moment, that it was acceptable. Grath looked back at her. Something moved behind his eyes, something old and buried and nameless. He did not know what it was. He filed it away and did not examine it further. In his daily logs, he referred to her only as the small thing. He recorded her feeding times, her sleep patterns, and the adjustments he had made to the room's environment. The logs read like field reports, dry and precise. But anyone reading them carefully would have noticed that they were updated far more frequently than any tactical report Grath had ever filed. Word spread through the ship, despite his efforts to keep things quiet. On a vessel carrying 400 soldiers, secrets had a lifespan measured in hours, not days. The reactions were mixed. The older soldiers, the veterans who had spent decades fighting humans, were disgusted. To them, humans were the enemy, clever and dangerous, and not to be trusted. A human infant was not a child to be protected. It was a future threat to be eliminated. Several of them filed formal complaints through the chain of command, though none had the courage to deliver them to Grath personally. The younger soldiers were different. Most of them had never fought humans in direct combat. The war was something they had been born into, a fact of life as constant and unquestioned as gravity. They had been told all their lives that humans were small, weak, treacherous creatures. But the idea of a baby, a tiny helpless thing that needed someone to feed it and hold it and keep it warm, did not fit neatly into the picture they had been given. A few of them began finding excuses to walk past Grath's quarters more often than necessary. One young medic named Pren went further. He was quiet, serious, and had joined the military because it was expected of him, rather than because he wanted to fight. He began leaving small packages outside Grath's door during the night cycle. Nutritional supplements, thermal wraps, and once, a tiny cloth toy he had sewn together from spare medical fabric. It was clumsy and shapeless, but it was soft, and when Grath placed it in the crib, the baby grabbed it with both hands and did not let go. Grath never acknowledged the gifts, but he never told Pren to stop either. Drea watched all of this from a careful distance. She checked on Grath once a day, always briefly, always under the pretense of delivering a routine report. She never touched the baby. She never spoke to it. But she noticed things. She noticed that Grath's voice, which had been the same flat, commanding tone for as long as she had known him, changed when he was in the room with the child. It became lower, softer, not gentle exactly. Grath did not know how to be gentle, but less sharp, like a blade that had been wrapped in cloth. She noticed that he slept less. She noticed that he ate at his desk instead of in the officer's mess. She noticed that the viewport in his quarters, which he had always kept shuttered, was now open, letting the faint light of distant stars fall across the crib, where the baby slept. She said nothing about any of it. But late one evening, as she was leaving his quarters after a briefing, she paused at the door and looked back. Grath was standing beside the crib, one massive hand resting on its edge, watching the baby sleep. "You know they will find out," she said quietly. Grath did not look up. "Yes. And when they do, they will come for her. Yes. What will you do?" He was quiet for a long time. The baby made a small sound in her sleep, a soft murmur that meant nothing, and his hand shifted slightly, his fingers curling around the edge of the crib, like a wall being built around something precious. "Whatever I have to," he said. Drea looked at him for another moment. Then she nodded once, pulled the door shut, and walked away down the long, dark corridor of the Iron Veil, carrying the weight of what she had just heard like a stone in her chest. 6 weeks That was how long the secret lasted. Grath had known it would not hold forever. Secrets aboard a warship were like cracks in a hull. They started small and spread until the whole structure gave way. Someone had talked. Maybe one of the veterans who had filed complaints. Maybe a communications officer who had noticed the unusual data requests coming from the commander's personal terminal. It did not matter who. What mattered was the coded transmission that arrived on the Iron Veil's command bridge at 0400 hours on a cold Tuesday morning, marked with the highest priority seal in the DreadWalker military, the crimson sigil of the High Arbiters. Drea was the one who received it. She read it twice, her face going still and hard like a door being locked. Then she walked to Grath's quarters and woke him. He was not asleep. He was sitting on the floor beside the crib, one arm draped over the edge, his massive body folded into a position that looked deeply uncomfortable for a creature his size. Lucy was awake too, lying on her back, gripping his index finger with both hands, and making small, happy sounds that had no meaning in any language. Drea handed him the transmission without speaking. He read it. His face did not change. "When?" he asked. "1 hour. They want a live hololink. Full tribunal." He nodded. He looked down at Lucy. She was still holding his finger, pulling at it with a strength that was laughable compared to his own, but somehow felt enormous. He gently freed his hand, placed the cloth toy beside her, and stood up. "Watch her," he said to Drea. She opened her mouth to object. Then she closed it. She looked at the baby. The baby looked at her with wide, curious eyes. Drea sat down stiffly on the edge of the sleeping platform, as far from the crib as she could manage, while still technically being in the same room. "I am not good with small things," she muttered. "Neither was I," Grath said, and walked out. The communication chamber was a large circular room at the heart of the Iron Veil. Holographic projectors lined the walls, capable of displaying life-sized images of anyone connected to the network. When Grath entered, the room was already active. 5 figures stood before him, each one projected at full scale, their images flickering faintly with the distortion of long-range transmission. At the center stood High Arbiter Morvan. Morvan was old, even by DreadWalker standards. He had held the position of supreme military authority for over 60 years, longer than most soldiers had been alive. His body was massive, wider and heavier than Grath's, but his movements were slow and deliberate, the movements of something that no longer needed to prove its strength. His eyes were pale, almost white, and they settled on Grath with the weight of a glacier pressing down on stone. The 4 other arbiters flanked him, 2 on each side. Grath knew them all by reputation. They were not kind creatures. They had not risen to the highest seats of DreadWalker power by being kind. Morvan spoke first. His voice filled the chamber like the rumble of a distant engine. "Commander Grath von, DreadWalker, 3rd rank. You are aware of why this tribunal has been called." "I am," Grath said. He stood at the center of the room, arms behind his back, spine straight, the posture of the soldier receiving judgment. "6 weeks ago, you recovered a human infant from the wreckage of a cargo convoy in the Kepler Expanse. Rather than following standard protocol for the disposal of enemy biological material, you brought the infant aboard your vessel and have been maintaining it in your personal quarters ever since. Is this account accurate?" "It is." The arbiter to Morvan's left, a broad-shouldered female named Vasek, leaned forward. "Commander, you are a decorated officer with 40 years of distinguished service. You wrote the operational handbook for deep space engagement. You are not a fool. So explain to this council why a DreadWalker of your standing has reduced himself to nursemaid for the offspring of the enemy." The word she used for offspring was not the polite one. In the DreadWalker language, it was closer to vermin spawn. A deliberate insult, aimed not at the baby, but at Grath for associating himself with it. Grath did not react. He let the silence sit for a moment, just long enough to make it clear that the insult had been heard and filed away. And then he spoke. Arbiter Vasek, with respect, the infant is not a combatant. She is not a spy. She is not a weapon. She is approximately 4 months old and weighs less than the ammunition cartridge in my sidearm. She was abandoned in a sealed crate with a note from their parents, begging whoever found her to keep her alive. I found her. I kept her alive. That is the full extent of my crime. Your crime, Morvan said slowly, is a violation of 4 articles of the military code. Your crime is the unauthorized harboring of enemy biological material aboard a warship of the DreadWalker Dominion. Your crime is the allocation of military resources, food, energy, climate systems, medical supplies, to the care of a member of a hostile species. These are not small things, Commander. No, Grath agreed. They are not. Then why? The question hung in the air. All 5 arbiters were watching him. The transmission was being broadcast across the fleet, to every command ship, every outpost, every listening station in the DreadWalker military network. Thousands of soldiers were watching. Grath could feel the weight of their attention pressing down on him from across the vastness of space. He answered simply, I have fought humans for 40 years. I have burned their cities. I have broken their fleets. I have buried their soldiers in numbers I stopped counting long ago. I have never once questioned my duty, and I have never once failed to carry it out. But the day I stand over a sleeping infant, and cannot tell the difference between that child and a combatant, is the day I am no longer fit to wear the title of DreadWalker. I will not become that creature, not for you, not for the Code, not for the Dominion. Deep, heavy silence that seemed to press against the walls of the chamber. Morvan's pale eyes narrowed. He was not angry, not visibly. He was too old and too experienced for visible anger. But something shifted in his expression, a tightening around the edges, the look of a creature who had just been told something he did not want to hear by someone he could not easily dismiss. Your sentiments are noted, Morvan said, and his voice was colder than before. The Council has already reached its decision. The infant will be transferred to the detention facility on the border moon of Cathos 7. It will be raised there under military supervision and held as a political asset for future negotiations with the human governments. You will deliver the infant within 48 hours. This is not a request, Commander. This is an order. Grath said nothing for a moment. Then he nodded. Understood, High Arbiter. This tribunal is concluded. The holograms flickered and disappeared. The room went dark. Grath stood alone in the silence for a long time. Then he turned and walked back to his quarters. Drea was still sitting on the sleeping platform. Lucy was in her arms, something that clearly had not been planned. Andrea's expression was caught somewhere between discomfort and something she would have denied fiercely if anyone had pointed it out. She looked up when Grath entered. She saw his face. She set the baby carefully back in the crib and stood. What did they say? She asked. Cathos 7, 48 hours. Drea was quiet for a moment. Cathos 7 was a cold gray moon used for holding prisoners and political hostages. The conditions there were designed for DreadWalker, not humans. An infant would not last a year. That is a death sentence, she said. Yes. What are you going to do? Grath walked to his desk. He pulled up a star chart on the display and zoomed in on a region of space near the outer edge of the galaxy, a thin strip of territory called the Orion Boundary. It was the neutral zone, the one place where neither DreadWalker nor human law applied. It was 3 days away at maximum speed. Plot a course, he said. Not to Cathos 7. Drea looked at the chart. She looked at him. She understood immediately. That is treason, Grath. Yes, it is. They will hunt us, every ship in the fleet. Yes, they will. She stared at him. He stared back. Between them, in the crib, Lucy grabbed the cloth toy and shoved it into her mouth with a satisfied gurgle. Drea closed her eyes. She took a breath. Then she walked to the navigation console and began entering coordinates. "You are going to get us all killed," she said quietly. "Possibly," Graf replied. He picked up Lucy and held her against his chest. She pressed her face into the gap between two plates of his armor and fell asleep almost instantly. But not today. The Iron Veil went dark at 0300 hours. Graf gave the order himself, standing on the command bridge with his hands behind his back, and his voice as calm as if he were ordering a routine systems check. "Kill the transponder. Disable the fleet tracking beacon. Shut down all outgoing communication signals. Take the ship off the grid." The bridge crew hesitated. These were not routine orders. These were the orders of a ship that did not want to be found, and every officer on the bridge knew exactly what that meant. Drea, standing at the navigation console, with the new course already locked in, repeated the order in a voice that left no room for discussion. The crew obeyed. Within minutes, the Iron Veil vanished from every tracking screen in the Dravaki fleet. One moment, it was a bright dot on the map, holding position near the Kepler expanse. The next moment, it was gone. Graf gave the ship 6 hours at maximum speed before he did what he knew he had to do. He activated the internal broadcast system and addressed the entire crew. His voice reached every corridor, every bunk room, every engine bay, and weapons station on the ship. 400 soldiers stopped what they were doing and listened. "This is Commander Graf Vaughn. You are aware by now that this ship has changed course and gone dark. I will not insult you by pretending otherwise. We are not heading to Cathos 7. We are heading to the neutral zone at the Orion boundary. I have disobeyed a direct order from the High Arbiters. By the definitions of the military code, what I have done is treason, and any crew member who remains aboard this ship will be considered a participant." He paused. The silence on the ship was total. Even the engines seemed to hold their breath. "I will not order anyone to follow me. The shuttle pods are fueled and ready. Any crew member who wishes to leave may do so now. I will log you in the official record as having been detained and released under my authority. No dishonor will fall on you. No punishment will reach you. You have my word as a DreadWalker." He paused again. "You have 1 hour to decide." He cut the broadcast and waited. The first shuttle launched 12 minutes later. It carried 8 soldiers, all veterans, all stone-faced and silent. They did not look back as they left. Over the next 40 minutes, more shuttles followed. Small groups, mostly. A few solo departures. Some left quickly, without hesitation. Others lingered at the airlock doors, torn between loyalty and survival, before finally stepping through. When the hour was up, Graf checked the crew manifest. 61 had left. 339 remained. Drea brought him the updated number on the bridge. She looked at it, then looked at him. "More than I expected," she said. Graf nodded. He had expected to lose half the crew, maybe more. 339 soldiers had just committed treason for a baby they had never held, commanded by a man who could not fully explain, even to himself, why he was doing what he was doing. "Get us to the boundary," he said. "Maximum speed. Avoid all patrol routes." "Already done," Drea replied. "I plotted us through the Venn Straits. It is the longest route, but the gravitational interference from the collapsing stars will make us almost impossible to track." "Almost. Almost is the best I can offer, Graf." He accepted it. The run took 3 days. 3 days of silence and tension, of watching the long-range sensors for any sign of pursuit, of jumping at every flicker on the scanner. The ship ran dark. No lights on the exterior hull, no active signals, nothing but the steady burn of the engines, pushing them forward through the black. Graf spent every free moment with Lucy. She was different now than she had been 6 weeks ago. She was bigger, for one thing, which amazed him. Human infants grew fast, far faster than DreadWalker young, and she had nearly doubled in size since he had found her. She was louder, too. She had discovered her voice and used it constantly, filling his quarters with a stream of babbling sounds that followed no pattern he could identify, but somehow never bothered him. And she had learned to smile. This was the thing that undid him, though he would never have used that word. DreadWalker infants did not smile until they were nearly a year old, and even then, it was a rare, fleeting expression that signaled satisfaction rather than joy. Lucy smiled at everything. She smiled when she woke up. She smiled when she was fed. She smiled when Graf held her, which was most of the time now, her tiny body tucked into the crook of his massive arm, like she had been designed to fit there. She smiled at his face, which was a thing made of stone and scars and hard edges that had frightened battle-hardened soldiers. She looked up at it and smiled as if it were the most wonderful thing she had ever seen. He began calling her Lucy, not in the logs, where she was still the recovered asset, but out loud, in the quiet of his quarters when no one else could hear. He said her name the way he had once said the names of fallen comrades, with weight and care and a kind of fierce tenderness that surprised him every time it surfaced. On the second day of the run, Pren, the young medic, came to Graf's quarters with a request. He wanted to give Lucy a proper medical examination. He had been studying human physiology in the ship's archives and believed he could provide better care if he had accurate data on her health. Graf agreed. Pren spent an hour scanning Lucy with modified medical instruments, working carefully around her constant squirming and occasional attempts to eat the scanner. When he was finished, he reported that she was healthy, well-fed, and developing normally for a human of her age. Then he paused and added, "She is also very attached to you, Commander. Her stress hormones drop to almost nothing when you hold her. I have never seen readings like that in any species." Graf said nothing. But that night, when Lucy fell asleep on his chest, her tiny hand wrapped around the edge of his armor plating, Graf stayed very still for a long time and let her sleep. On the third day, the sensors screamed. 3 DreadWalker warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the far end of the Ven Straits, blocking the path to the neutral zone. They were Hunter-class cruisers, smaller than the Iron Veil, but fast and heavily armed. Their hulls were painted with the red markings of the Enforcement Division, the military police of the DreadWalker Dominion. The lead ship was the Scorched Hand, and it was commanded by Warden Cale Thur. Graf knew Thur by reputation. Every soldier in the fleet did. He was an enforcer, a creature built for obedience and punishment in equal measure. He had hunted down more deserters and traitors than any other warden in the fleet's history, and he had never once failed to bring his target back, usually in pieces. Thur's voice came over the communication channel, cold and precise. "Commander Graf Vaughn, you are ordered to power down your engines, lower your shields, and surrender yourself and the human asset to the custody of the Enforcement Division. You have 15 minutes to comply. After that, we will board you by force." Graf stood on the bridge, watching the 3 ships on the main display. They were arranged in a standard interception formation, spreading out to cover all possible escape routes. It was textbook. Graf had written that textbook. He opened the channel. "Warden Thur, you will have to come and take her." Then he closed the channel and turned to Drea. "Position us at the mouth of the straits. Put the collapsing stars at our back." The Ven Straits were narrow, and the 2 collapsing stars on either side generated massive gravitational distortions. Any ship trying to approach the Iron Veil head-on would be pulled off course, its weapons destabilized, its shields strained by the shifting tidal forces. It was a death trap for an attacker and a fortress for a defender. It was the same maneuver Grath had used at the Battle of Karoth 9, the engagement that had earned him his DreadWalker title. Thur recognized it too. He was not a fool. He knew that a frontal assault through the straits would cost him at least 2 of his 3 ships, possibly all of them. He held position and waited, his ships circling like predators around a prey they could not reach. The standoff lasted 4 hours. During the 3rd hour, something appeared on the sensors from the other side of the straits, from the direction of the neutral zone. It was small, unarmed, and broadcasting on all frequencies. A human vessel. It was a diplomatic courier ship called the Amelia. Its captain was a woman named Nora Beckett. She was 43 years old, career diplomatic corps, and she had been monitoring Dravaki military communications from her post near the Orion boundary for the past 6 days. She had intercepted fragments of the tribunal broadcast. She had pieced together the story of the DreadWalker and the baby, and she had come. Her message was broadcast on every open frequency, audible to the Iron Veil, to Thur's ships, and to every listening station within range. This is Captain Nora Beckett of the diplomatic courier Amelia, operating under the protection of the Interstellar Neutral Compact, Article 17. I am offering to receive the human child currently aboard the Dravaki warship Iron Veil. Under Article 17, any biological dependent of a signatory species recovered in a conflict zone may be transferred to neutral custody without prejudice. I am requesting safe passage to complete this transfer. Thur was furious. A diplomatic vessel in the neutral zone was untouchable. Firing on it would violate the compact, and violating the compact would trigger a response from every neutral power in the sector. It could start a war, a real one, not the cold standoff that had defined the past century. He contacted the High Arbiters. The response took 45 minutes. When it came, it was 3 words: stand down, retrieve crew. Thur pulled his ships back. Grath watched the Amelia approach through the viewport. It was tiny compared to the Iron Veil, a fragile thing made of white metal and glass, and it moved through the gravitational chaos of the straits with careful, deliberate grace. A shuttle separated from the Amelia and docked with the Iron Veil's airlock. Grath was already there. Lucy was in his arms, wrapped in a Dravaki military blanket that was far too large for her. Her eyes wide open, looking around at everything with the fearless curiosity that he had come to know so well. The airlock opened. Nora Beckett stood on the other side. She was small. All humans were small to Grath, but she seemed especially so, standing alone in the doorway of a shuttle that was dwarfed by the warship around it. She had brown hair pulled back from her face and steady, serious eyes that looked up at him without flinching. "Commander Vaughn," she said, "I am Captain Beckett. I give you my word that this child will be safe." Grath looked down at her. He did not speak for a moment. Then he looked at Lucy. She was staring up at him. She was not smiling this time. Her expression was calm, open, trusting in a way that cut deeper than any weapon he had ever faced. She reached up with one small hand and pressed it against the side of his face, her fingers barely covering the width of a single scar. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, he lowered her into Nora Beckett's arms. The transfer was gentle, slow, and precise. Lucy squirmed for a moment, confused by the new hands, the new warmth, the new heartbeat against her ear. Then she settled. Nora held her carefully. She looked up at Grath. "Do you want to say goodbye?" Grath pressed one armored finger against Lucy's palm. She grabbed it. She held on tight, her tiny fingers wrapped around the tip of his claw, with a grip that should not have meant anything, but meant everything. He held that position for 3 seconds. Then he gently pulled free. He said nothing. He stepped back. The airlock closed between them. He stood at the viewport and watched the shuttle fly back to the Amelia. He watched the Amelia turn and move away, back toward the neutral zone, growing smaller and smaller, until it was just a point of light among the stars. He watched until it was gone. Then he turned, walked back to the bridge, and gave the order to power down the engines. Thur's ships closed in. The Iron Veil had nowhere left to run, and Grath had no intention of running. He had done what he set out to do. The rest was just gravity. They came for him within the hour. Thur's soldiers boarded the Iron Veil in full combat gear, weapons raised, moving through the corridors like they expected resistance. There was none. Grath had ordered his crew to stand down, and they obeyed, lining the hallways with their hands empty and their faces hard but calm. Grath was waiting on the bridge. He was unarmed. His posture was straight, his hands behind his back, and his expression was the same flat, unreadable mask he had worn for 40 years. Thur walked in with an escort of 12 armed soldiers, and stopped 3 paces in front of him. "Commander Grath Vaughn," Thur said, "you are under arrest for treason, desertion, violation of Military Code Articles 7, 12, 19, and 31, unauthorized diversion of a military vessel, and refusal to comply with a direct order from the High Arbiters. You are stripped of your rank, your title, and all honors. Your armor will be removed. You will be transported to the prison world of Vorath to serve a sentence of permanent exile. Do you have anything to say?" Grath looked at him. He did not speak for a long moment. Then he said, "Take care of my crew. They followed orders. Mine, not yours, but orders all the same. They are soldiers. Treat them as such." Thur gave no response to this. He nodded to his men, and they moved forward to take Grath into custody. The removal of his armor took 6 hours. It was not a simple process. Biofused plating was grafted to the wearer's body at the cellular level, bonded to skin and muscle and bone. Removing it was part surgery, part demolition, and it was agonizing. The military used it as part of the punishment, a deliberate stripping away of everything a DreadWalker was, leaving behind only the raw, scarred creature underneath. Grath endured it without a sound. The medics who performed the procedure later said they had never seen anyone stay silent through the full removal. Most screamed. Some passed out. Grath simply stared at the ceiling and breathed. When it was done, he looked smaller. Not small. He was still over 12 feet of muscle and bone and hard gray skin, but diminished, like a building with its walls torn off. The scars where the plating had been grafted were visible now. Thick ridges of tissue running across his chest, his arms, his back. He looked like something that had been taken apart and not quite put back together. They put him in a cell aboard Thur's ship and flew him to Vorath. Vorath was a world that seemed to have been built by the universe as an afterthought. It was small, gray, and cold, orbiting a pale sun that gave just enough light to see by, but never enough to feel warm. The surface was bare rock and dust, broken up by squat, featureless prison buildings that looked like they had grown out of the ground rather than been constructed on it. There were no fences. There was nowhere to go. Grath's cell was a stone room with a narrow window, a sleeping slab, and nothing else. He was the only prisoner in his block. The guards checked on him twice a day, brought him food, and said nothing. He was, in every way that mattered, erased. The days passed. He counted them at first, out of habit, the way a soldier counts ammunition. Then he stopped. He thought about Lucy. He wondered if she was warm enough. He wondered if she cried at night without the sound of his heartbeat to calm her down. He wondered if she would remember him, and knew, with a certainty that sat in his chest like a cold stone, that she would not. Whatever he had meant to her would fade like a signal lost in the noise of space. He found that this hurt more than the removal of his armor. Far away, on the other side of the galaxy, Nora Beckett kept her word. the Amelia reached human space without incident. Nora filed her report with the Diplomatic Corps, classifying Lucy as a conflict zone dependent, recovered under Article 17 of the Interstellar Neutral Compact. The paperwork was clean. The legal protections were solid. Lucy was, on paper, a child of the void, belonging to no faction and protected by all of them. Nora had the harder task of finding her a home. She chose carefully. She spent weeks reviewing families on the colony world of New Helena, a quiet green planet on the inner edge of human territory that had been largely untouched by the war. She was looking for something specific. People who were kind without being fragile, steady without being rigid, warm without asking too many questions. She found Sam and Claire Whitfield. Sam was a teacher. He taught history to teenagers at the colony's main school, and he had a way of making even the bloodiest chapters of humanity's past feel like stories worth learning from, rather than wounds worth picking at. He was 38, calm, patient, and had a smile that arrived slowly, but stayed a long time. Claire was a botanist. She worked in the colony's agricultural station, growing food crops adapted to New Helena soil. She was 35, practical, curious, and had been on the waiting list for adoption for 4 years. She wanted a child the way some people wanted air, not as a luxury, but as a thing she could not quite breathe without. Nora brought Lucy to them on a Tuesday afternoon. She handed the baby to Claire in the doorway of their small sunlit house, and Claire held her and did not say anything for a long time. Sam stood beside her with his hand on her back, looking down at the baby's face with an expression that started as wonder and settled into something quieter and deeper. Nora told them only that Lucy had been recovered from a conflict zone. She did not tell them how. She did not tell them who had found her, or what he had sacrificed to keep her alive. Some stories, she decided, were too heavy for a beginning. On the DreadWalker side, the ripples spread slowly. Grath's words at the tribunal had been broadcast to every command ship in the fleet. The transmission was supposed to serve as a warning, a demonstration of what happened to those who defied the High Arbiters. Instead, it became something else entirely. The day I cannot tell the difference between a combatant and a sleeping infant is the day I am no longer fit to wear the title of DreadWalker. The sentence traveled through the fleet like fire through dry grass. It was repeated in barracks and whispered in mess halls. Young soldiers carved fragments of it into the walls of training academies, scratching the words into metal with the tips of their claws. Veterans who had spent their entire lives following orders without question found themselves lying awake at night, turning the sentence over in their minds like a stone they could not put down. It was not a revolution. It was not even a movement. It was something smaller than that. A crack, a question, a seed planted in hard ground. But it was there, and it was growing. The High Arbiters tried to suppress it. They classified the tribunal recording. They disciplined anyone caught repeating Grath's words. They promoted officers who publicly condemned his actions, and reassigned those who did not. None of it worked. You cannot unspeak a thing that has already been heard. 5 years passed. In those 5 years, the Cold War between the DreadWalker Dominion and the Human Coalition shifted in ways that neither side fully understood. The hardline faction on the DreadWalker side, the ones who had always pushed for total war, found themselves losing influence. Not because they were wrong about the military math, but because the soldiers beneath them had begun to ask questions that the math could not answer. On the human side, Nora Beckett published a carefully edited account of the incident, stripped of classified details, but preserving the essence of what had happened. A DreadWalker commander had found a human child and had thrown away everything he had to protect her. The story spread through human media and landed in places that policy papers and peace proposals had never reached. It landed in the hearts of ordinary people, the ones who did not make decisions about war and peace, but whose opinions, gathered together, could move the ones who did. The first formal ceasefire was signed on a neutral station in the Orion boundary. It was not peace. It was just an agreement to stop killing long enough to talk. But it was the first such agreement in a century, and when the historians wrote about it later, they argued endlessly about what had caused it. Some said economics. Some said war fatigue. Some said it was inevitable. A few, the ones who had been there, who had stood in the corridors of the Iron Veil, or sat in the communication chambers listening to a giant speak about a sleeping baby, said something different. They said it started with a choice, one choice, made by one creature who decided that being strong and being cruel were not the same thing. On Vorath, Grath sat in his cell and watched the pale sun sink below the horizon through his narrow window. He had no rank, he had no title, he had no armor. His body was covered in scars that would never fully heal, and his days were empty in a way that should have broken him, but somehow had not. He had received no visitors, no messages, no acknowledgement from anyone in the Dominion that he still existed. As far as the official record was concerned, Grath Vaughn had been erased. Then, one evening, a guard came to his cell and dropped a small package through the slot in the door without a word. It was wrapped in plain material, unmarked, with no indication of where it had come from or how it had reached a prison world at the edge of Dravaki space. Inside was a single piece of paper. It was small, folded carefully, and the handwriting on it was human, neat, and deliberate. It said, "She smiled today. She has your stubbornness." There was no signature, no name, no return address, but Grath read it and knew, with a certainty that went deeper than logic or evidence, that it had come from someone who had kept a promise. He read the note once, then he read it again. He folded it along its creases and pressed it against his chest, right over the place where his rank insignia used to sit, where the armor had been thickest, where the scar tissue was deepest. He held it there for a long time. The sun finished setting. The cell went dark. The only sound was the wind outside, moving across the empty stone surface of a world that had been built for forgetting. And in that darkness, in that silence, in that place where everything had been taken from him, the DreadWalker did something that no Dravaki had ever been recorded doing in the long and bloody history of their species. He smiled. It was small. It was barely visible. It lasted only a moment before the hard lines of his face settled back into place. But it was real as the tiny fingers that had once wrapped around his claw and held on tight, as real as the weight of a sleeping child against his chest, as real as the simple, staggering truth that some things, once felt, cannot be unfelt, no matter how far away they go. He placed the note beneath his head and lay down on the stone slab. He closed his eyes. And for the first time in 5 years, the DreadWalker slept without dreaming of war. Outside, the stars burned on in their ancient, patient silence, indifferent to the small and enormous things that happened beneath them. But somewhere among them, on a green world orbiting a warm sun, a little girl with dark eyes and a stubborn streak that no one could quite explain was growing up loved and safe and free. And that was enough. The wreckage floated in silence. Broken metal, torn hull plates, and shattered glass drifted through the cold emptiness of space like the bones of something long dead. The human cargo convoy had been 6 ships strong just 3 hours ago. Now it was nothing but scrap and dust, scattered across the darkness near the outer edge of the Kepler expanse. The Dravaki warship Iron Veil hung above the debris field like a predator standing over a fresh kill. It was enormous, nearly 2 miles long from bow to stern, covered in dark plating that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. Along its sides, rows of weapon ports glowed with a faint orange heat, still cooling from the barrage that had torn the convoy apart. Commander Grath Vaughn stood on the observation deck and watched his soldiers work. They moved through the wreckage in armored shuttles and walking rigs, pulling apart the remains of the human ships and cataloging everything they found. Weapons, supplies, data cores, anything that could be useful to the HFY war effort was collected. Everything else was left to drift. Grath was a DreadWalker, one of the highest military ranks in the entire HFY Dominion, and he looked the part. He stood over 12 feet tall. His body was wrapped in biofused battle plating, a living armor that had been grafted to his skin and bones decades ago and had grown with him ever since. His face was broad and hard, with deep-set eyes the color of burning coal and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from stone. His hands were massive, each finger ending in a short, thick claw that could punch through steel plating without effort. He had been fighting humans for 40 years. He had led fleets, burned cities, and broken entire armies. He was not a creature built for softness, and he had never pretended to be. His communicator crackled. A young soldier's voice came through, tight with confusion. "Commander, this is Torek. I have something here. Section 9 of the debris field. I think you need to see this." Grath frowned. Torek was new, barely 2 years out of the academy, and still jumped at shadows. But his voice had a strange quality to it this time. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. "On my way," Grath said. He took a shuttle across the debris field. The wreckage was thick here. Large sections of hull plating stacked on top of each other like collapsed walls. Torek was standing near a gap in the debris, his weapon lowered, staring down at something on the ground. Grath landed and walked over. His heavy boots crunched against the broken metal beneath him. "What is it?" Torek pointed. Buried beneath a collapsed section of hull plating, half hidden in shadow, was a cargo crate. It was small, no bigger than a standard supply box, but it was different from the others. It was reinforced with thermal shielding, the kind used to protect sensitive materials from extreme heat or cold. It was also sealed with a magnetic lock, which meant someone had gone to great trouble to keep it shut. "I ran a scan," Torek said. "There is something alive inside." Grath looked at him. "Alive?" "Yes, Commander. Faint life signs, very small." Grath knelt beside the crate. He could hear something now, a faint hum coming from inside, the sound of a small machine working hard to keep running. He pressed his claws into the edges of the magnetic lock and pulled. The seal broke with a sharp crack, and the lid came free. The inside of the crate was warm. A tiny oxygen recycler sat in one corner, wheezing softly as it pumped breathable air into the small space. There were strips of insulation lining the walls, and in the center, wrapped in a thin emergency blanket that was far too large for her, was a human baby. She was tiny, impossibly tiny. Grath had seen human adults up close many times, usually through the sights of a weapon, but he had never seen one this small. She could not have been more than a few months old. Her skin was pink and soft. Her eyes were closed. Her hands, each one no bigger than Grath's smallest claw, were curled into loose fists around the edge of the blanket. She was asleep. Tucked beside her was a folded piece of paper, actual paper, torn from something larger. Grath picked it up carefully, holding it between two fingers like it might crumble to dust. The writing on it was messy, written in a hurry, and he had to run it through his translator to read it. "Her name is Lucy. Please, whoever finds her, keep her safe. We couldn't." Grath read the note twice. Then he read it a third time. He looked down at the baby. She had not moved. Her chest rose and fell in tiny, even breaths. She had no idea where she was. She had no idea what was standing over her. Behind him, Torek shifted uncomfortably. "Commander, standard protocol for human biological material found in a contested zone is disposal. I can handle it if you want." Grath did not respond immediately. He was still looking at the baby. There was something about the way she slept, completely unaware, completely trusting, that held him in place. He had seen soldiers sleep like that, young ones, on the night before their first battle, before they learned what the universe really was. He reached into the crate with one hand. His armored fingers, each one thicker than the baby's entire arm, slid beneath the blanket and lifted the crate gently from the wreckage. "This is now classified as recovered intelligence assets," he said. His voice was flat, the same tone he used when giving any order. "It will be brought aboard the Iron Veil for examination." Torek stared at him. "Commander, that is a human infant." "I am aware of what it is. The regulations say that. I wrote half of those regulations, Torek." Grath turned and looked down at the young soldier. The difference in their size was massive. Torek was a full-grown Dravaki warrior, over 9 feet tall and armed to the teeth, and Grath still towered over him like a mountain over a hill. "Are you going to tell me what they say?" Torek closed his mouth. He shook his head. "Good. Return to your duties." Grath carried the crate back to his shuttle. He set it on the floor beside him and flew back to the Iron Veil in silence. The baby slept through the entire trip. She did not cry. She did not wake. She just lay there, breathing, alive, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like engine oil and fear. As the shuttle docked inside the Iron Veil's main hangar, Grath looked down at the crate one more time. Every soldier in the hangar was watching him. He could feel their eyes, dozens of them, tracking the small box in his arms, with a mixture of confusion, suspicion, and something that might have been disgust. He did not care. He had made his decision, and he did not yet understand why, but he knew with a certainty that sat deep in his chest, like a second heartbeat, that he was not going to let this small sleeping thing be thrown away like scrap metal. He walked through the hangar without a word, carrying the crate against his chest, and disappeared into the corridors of the ship. Behind him, the silence lasted a long time.